Your bank account shows the same number it did last year, but that coffee you bought yesterday costs 30% more than it did 12 months ago. Right now, while you're watching this video, your hard-earned savings are losing purchasing power faster than water drains from a bathtub with the plug pulled out. The shadowy network of financial elites, central bankers, and government officials have perfected the art of wealth extraction through inflation, a silent tax that operates without legislation, without your consent, and without most people even noticing until it's too late. If you've ever wondered why your grocery bills keep climbing while your salary stays flat, or why housing prices seem to defy all logic, then hit that subscribe button because we're about to expose the mechanisms they don't want you to understand. Your bank account shows the same number it did last year, but that coffee you bought yesterday costs 30% more than it did 12 months ago. Right now, while you're watching this video, your hard-earned savings are losing purchasing power faster than water drains from a bathtub with the plug pulled out. The shadowy network of financial elites, central bankers, and government officials have perfected the art of wealth extraction through inflation, a silent tax that operates without legislation, without your consent, and without most people even noticing until it's too late. If you've ever wondered why your grocery bills keep climbing while your salary stays flat, or why housing prices seem to defy all logic, then hit that subscribe button because we're about to expose the mechanisms they don't want you to understand. The numbers don't lie, and the recent Federal Reserve projections paint a chilling picture. Inflation in 2025 was expected to remain at about the same rate as in 2024, as the effects of the staff's placeholder trade policy assumptions held inflation up. This isn't accidental, it's engineered. While you struggle to make ends meet, there's an entire apparatus working behind the scenes to ensure that your money becomes worth less every single day. Every time you hear a politician promise economic stability or a central banker claim they're fighting inflation, remember this moment, because what you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you see every economic announcement, every interest rate decision, and every policy that claims to help working families. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for you. The inflation game operates on four fundamental pillars that work together to systematically transfer wealth from your pocket to theirs. First, the money printing machine that creates currency out of thin air while devaluing every dollar you own. Second, the deliberate manipulation of interest rates that punishes savers and rewards debtors. Third, the asset bubble creation that prices ordinary people out of homeownership and wealth building. And fourth, the psychological manipulation that convinces you this is all normal and necessary. Think about the moment you realized something was fundamentally wrong with the economy. Maybe it was when you calculated that your parents bought their house for what you now pay in rent for a year. Maybe it was when you discovered that a college education that once cost a few $1,000s now requires taking on mortgage-level debt. Or perhaps it was the gut punch of realizing that despite working harder than previous generations, you're falling further behind financially. This isn't happening by accident, and it isn't the result of market forces or natural economic cycles. Every inflationary period in modern history has coincided with massive wealth transfers from the middle class to the wealthy elite. The Weimar Republic saw exactly this pattern, where state debt rose by 30 times, from 5 billion marks to 153 billion marks, before the currency collapsed entirely. The difference today is that the modern system is more sophisticated, more subtle, and far more effective at disguising what's really happening. Right now, as you're listening to these words, central banks around the world are coordinating policies that ensure your savings lose value at a predetermined rate. They call it targeting inflation, but what they're really targeting is your wealth. The Federal Reserve openly admits they want inflation to remain elevated, and their projections show they have no intention of bringing prices back down to previous levels. So the first pillar of this wealth extraction system is the money printing operation that, honestly, most people never see or even understand. When central banks engage in what's called quantitative easing, they're not actually printing physical cash. No, they're creating digital money entries that just flood the financial system with newly created currency. And every time they do this, the purchasing power of the money you've worked for and saved, well, it just decreases proportionally. Here's how the magic trick works. The Federal Reserve announces they're buying billions of dollars worth of government bonds to stimulate the economy. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's what they don't tell you. They're buying these bonds with money that didn't even exist 5 minutes before they decided to purchase them. They simply create new money electronically, use it to buy bonds from banks and financial institutions, and then those institutions suddenly have billions of fresh dollars to lend or invest. But those newly created dollars don't just sit in some vault gathering dust, they immediately enter the financial system, competing with your existing dollars for the same goods and services. And when there are more dollars chasing the same amount of stuff, prices go up. It's that simple. But while prices rise across the economy, your salary doesn't automatically adjust upward at the same rate. The real genius of this system is that it creates winners and losers based on when you receive the new money. Banks and large financial institutions get the fresh dollars first, when they still have full purchasing power. They use this money to buy assets, stocks, bonds, and real estate, before prices adjust upward. By the time the inflation filters down to your grocery store and gas station, the asset prices have already been bid up by people spending newly printed money. This is why, stock markets often rally during periods of money printing, even when the underlying economy is struggling. It's not because companies are suddenly more profitable or productive, it's because asset prices are being inflated by an injection of newly created money. Meanwhile, your savings account earning 0.1% interest is losing purchasing power at 3 to 5% annually. Quantitative easing, or QE, helps stimulate the economy by driving down interest rates, which honestly hurts savers. This admission from financial institutions reveals the intentional nature of the wealth transfer. When they say it helps stimulate the economy, they mean it helps people who can borrow money at low rates to buy assets. When they say it hurts savers, they mean it destroys the purchasing power of people who work hard and save money responsibly. The scale of this money creation has reached absolutely staggering proportions. Since the 2008 financial crisis, central banks worldwide have created more money than existed in the entire previous history of their countries. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from under $1 trillion to nearly $9 trillion in just over a decade. That represents an incredible transfer of purchasing power from existing money holders to new money recipients. Every dollar they create reduces the value of every dollar you own, but the reduction isn't distributed equally. People who hold cash and savings accounts bear the full burden of this devaluation. People who hold assets that inflate in price, real estate, stocks, commodities, often see their wealth increase faster than the general inflation rate. This creates a two-tiered system where asset owners get richer and cash savers get poorer. Now, the second pillar of the wealth extraction system is the manipulation of interest rates to create artificial economic conditions that, honestly, favor borrowers over savers. For over a decade, central banks have kept interest rates near zero, creating an environment where saving money is basically penalized, while borrowing money is subsidized by the system. When interest rates are artificially suppressed below the rate of inflation, every dollar you save is, guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. Traditional savings accounts, certificates of deposit, and government bonds all provide returns that are far below the real rate of inflation. This forces savers into increasingly risky investments just to maintain their purchasing power, creating artificial demand for stocks, corporate bonds, and real estate. Meanwhile, large corporations and wealthy individuals can borrow money at rates that are often below the inflation rate, which means they're essentially being paid to take on debt. They use this cheap money to buy assets, expand operations, and acquire smaller competitors. This debt-fueled expansion concentrates wealth and market power in the hands of those who already have access to large amounts of capital. But the manipulation doesn't stop at the official interest rates set by central banks. The entire yield curve, the relationship between short-term and long-term interest rates, is distorted by central bank intervention. When they buy long-term bonds through quantitative easing programs, they artificially suppress long-term rates, creating yield curves that would never exist in a free market. This distortion sends false signals throughout the economy about the real cost of capital and the time preference of savers. Projects that would never be economically viable at market rates of interest suddenly appear profitable when interest rates are artificially suppressed. This leads to misallocation of capital, asset bubbles, and ultimately economic instability that requires even more intervention to maintain. The psychological impact of low interest rates can't be understated. When people realize that saving money in traditional ways guarantees a loss of purchasing power, they're forced to become speculators in assets they don't really understand. Retirement savers are pushed into stock markets at historic valuations. Young families are pressured to buy houses at prices that previous generations would consider, honestly, insane. Everyone is forced to take on more risk just to preserve their wealth. Quantitative easing creates asset price inflation and income inequality. It benefits asset owners disproportionately. This observation by financial analysts reveals the true purpose of these policies. They're not designed to help ordinary workers or families trying to build wealth through saving and prudent financial management. They're designed to inflate asset prices for people who already own significant assets. The third pillar involves the systematic creation of asset bubbles that, really, price ordinary people out of wealth-building opportunities while enriching those who already possess significant assets. Every major asset class, housing, stocks, bonds, commodities, has been inflated far beyond levels that would exist in a free market without massive monetary intervention. Housing provides probably the most obvious and painful example of this bubble creation. In most major cities, median home prices have increased far faster than median incomes, creating a situation where homeownership has become unattainable for large segments of the population. And this isn't the result of housing shortages or increased construction costs. It's the direct result of artificially cheap money bidding up asset prices. When central banks create money and suppress interest rates, real estate becomes an attractive investment for people looking to preserve wealth against inflation. Investment firms, foreign buyers, and wealthy individuals can borrow money at low rates to purchase multiple properties, knowing that real estate often outpaces general inflation. This increased demand from investors competes directly with families trying to buy homes to live in. The same dynamic plays out in stock markets, where artificially created money flows into equity investments, driving valuations to levels that bear little relationship to underlying corporate profits or economic productivity. Price-to-earnings ratios reach historic highs, not because companies are dramatically more profitable, but because there's more money chasing the same number of shares. Corporate bond markets experience similar distortions, where companies with questionable creditworthiness can issue debt at historically low interest rates. This allows poorly managed companies to survive and even thrive in an environment where they would normally face bankruptcy. It also creates artificial demand for corporate debt, pushing yields down and prices up across the entire corporate bond market. Commodity markets, including precious metals, agricultural products, and energy, all experience price distortions when massive amounts of newly created money enter the system. Commodities become alternative stores of value for investors trying to protect themselves from currency debasement, creating additional upward pressure on the prices of basic necessities. The cruel irony is that people who need these assets the most, young families trying to buy homes, workers trying to build retirement savings, small savers looking for safe investments, are the ones priced out by the very policies that claim to help the economy. The money creation that drives asset prices higher makes it increasingly difficult for ordinary people to participate in wealth building. Even worse, when people do manage to buy assets at inflated prices, they become trapped in the bubble. If asset prices were allowed to return to historically normal levels, millions of families would find themselves underwater on mortgages or holding investments worth far less than they paid. This creates political pressure to continue the inflationary policies indefinitely. The fourth and perhaps most insidious pillar is the psychological manipulation that convinces the public that this systematic wealth extraction is not only normal, but necessary for economic stability and growth. Through carefully crafted messaging, complex economic theories, and appeals to authority, the architects of inflation have convinced most people that having their savings quietly stolen is actually good for them. The language used to describe these policies is deliberately designed to obscure their true purpose. Money printing is called quantitative easing. Currency debasement is called accommodative monetary policy. Wealth transfers from savers to borrowers are called economic stimulus. Asset bubbles are called wealth effects. Every destructive aspect of the system is rebranded with euphemisms that make it sound beneficial. Economic experts and financial media play crucial roles in maintaining this psychological manipulation. They present inflation as a complex phenomenon that requires expert management rather than a straightforward consequence of creating too much money. They argue that without constant intervention, the economy would collapse, creating fear that prevents people from questioning the system. The education system reinforces this manipulation by teaching Keynesian economics as established fact rather than one competing theory among many. Students learn that government spending stimulates economic growth, that inflation can be beneficial, and that central bank intervention is necessary for economic stability. They're not taught about the Austrian School of Economics, which accurately predicted the consequences of these interventionist policies decades ago. Media coverage of economic issues consistently frames inflation as something that happens to people rather than something that is done to them. News reports discuss rising prices as natural phenomena, like weather events, rather than the predictable consequences of specific policy decisions. When politicians and central bankers are interviewed, their explanations are rarely challenged with basic questions about cause and effect. The most effective aspect of this psychological manipulation is the way it makes victims blame themselves for their financial struggles. When housing becomes unaffordable, people are told they need to save more for a down payment, rather than questioning why housing prices have increased so dramatically. When retirement savings lose purchasing power, people are told they need to save more rather than questioning why safe savings vehicles provide negative real returns. Social pressure reinforces these messages. People who express concerns about currency debasement or central bank policies are often dismissed as conspiracy theorists or extremists. The acceptable range of economic discussion is carefully limited to debates about the proper level of intervention, rather than whether intervention is appropriate at all. Recent Federal Reserve communications show this manipulation in action. The Fed will next consider rates at its October 28 to 29, 2025 meeting, with markets implying an 89% chance of another quarter-point cut. Notice how this information is presented as market expectations, rather than policy decisions, that will have direct impacts on savers and borrowers. The language makes it seem like natural market forces rather than deliberate choices by a small group of officials. The ultimate goal of this psychological manipulation is to make people accept their declining purchasing power as inevitable and necessary. Once people believe that inflation is natural and beneficial, they stop looking for the real causes and stop demanding better policies. They become complicit in their own wealth extraction. The coordinated nature of this wealth extraction system becomes clear when you examine how all four pillars work together to create a self-reinforcing cycle. Money printing creates inflation, which justifies keeping interest rates low to prevent recession. Low interest rates create asset bubbles, which generate wealth effects that temporarily mask the declining purchasing power of wages. Psychological manipulation prevents people from connecting these dots and demanding change. This system has created the largest wealth inequality in modern history, with asset owners accumulating wealth at unprecedented rates while wage earners fall steadily behind. Unconventional monetary policies reduced inequality within the bottom 90% by lowering unemployment, but widen the income gap between the top 10% and the rest by raising profits and equity prices. This admission from Federal Reserve research shows they understand exactly what their policies accomplish. The timing of this revelation couldn't be more critical. Current monetary policies are reaching their mathematical limits, with interest rates already near zero and central bank balance sheets expanded to historic proportions. Corporate debt has more than doubled over the last decade, so access for corporations to the debt markets does not seem to be a problem. The system has created massive debt burdens that will require continued inflation to remain manageable. Political developments suggest that challenges to Federal Reserve independence may emerge, but a significant weakening of Fed independence could lead to a sharp market reaction. Inflation expectations would presumably rise, as would longer-term interest rates, while stock prices and the foreign exchange value of the dollar would likely fall. The system has become so dependent on continued intervention that any attempt at reform creates immediate market instability. Understanding these mechanisms is the first step toward protecting yourself and your family from continued wealth extraction. The people who benefit from this system count on your ignorance and complacency. They need you to keep believing that experts know best, that inflation is natural, and that there are no alternatives to current policies. But there are alternatives, and there are ways to protect yourself. Throughout history, people who understood monetary debasement positioned themselves to preserve and grow wealth even during periods of currency destruction. The tools and strategies they used are still available today for people who understand what's happening and take appropriate action. The choice is yours. Continue to be a victim of this wealth extraction system, or educate yourself and take control of your financial future. Your savings are under attack right now, this moment, as you finish watching this video. The question is what you're going to do about it. Subscribe to this channel for more content that reveals the truth they don't want you to know, and share this video with everyone who deserves to understand how the game is really played. Remember, they can only steal your wealth quietly if you don't understand the mechanisms they're using. Once you see the system clearly, you can't unsee it, and you can start making decisions that protect your financial future rather than unconsciously participating in your own impoverishment. The deep state's inflation game only works when people don't realize they're playing it.